Summarize your bill for us, will you? What do you want to accomplish with this?
Well, thank you, David, for having me on the show today. The clean energy bill that I've introduced with Ben Ray Lujan from New Mexico would establish a goal of getting to 100% net zero carbon emissions in the electricity sector by the middle of this century. And it does it by moving where states already are moving. We think, first of all, that in order to achieve that goal, you've got to be technology neutral. You can't proscribe from Washington, D.C. how to achieve that goal. You got to start with what works in states. And we also think that it is really important to follow the lead of local utilities who are moving towards clean energy because it is more affordable and because it helps them to address what their customers want them to address, which is climate change.
So what is the hole that you're filling here? Because as you say, states are moving this direction. Certainly California, other states are moving this direction already. Some of the utilities are moving this direction. Do we need the federal government, or can the private sector do this on its own with the states' help?
Well, I think we need a partnership between the federal government and states and utilities and local governments to make this happen. On its own, we're not going to move fast enough. We know that we've got an urgent challenge before us. But what we also know is that the United States can either lead or follow when it comes to moving towards a clean energy future. And I think that we should be in the lead. It's going to be good for jobs and good for our climate and good for our environment and good for our economy. So having a standard that is a federal standard and lets every state, every utility start from where they are and then improve gets us to where we want to go. All the modeling shows.
Is there the political will to really move forward on something like this? Because as I said at the beginning, we're spending our time, it seems like, in investigations and China trade and this and that and the other thing. We don't get to climate change. Is there the political will, and where does it come from?
Well, I hope that there's the political will. And, I often say that in Washington, D.C., there's sort of one Washington where all anybody does is talk about the Mueller investigation and the president. And, I mean, those are real issues, don't get me wrong. But then there's this other part of Washington where people are actually trying to solve problems. And that's where I operate. Now, I want to be clear. I don't have any Republican sponsors for my bill yet, but I am working on that. And I think that a senator who lives in a state that has, for example, a great hydroelectric power and wants to see his state or her state move into the future would look at this bill and say, gosh, this is great. Labor unions like it, environmental organizations like it, the utilities like it. What's not to like?
Let's talk about another problem that affects the state of Minnesota, and particularly farmers in the state of Minnesota, and that is what's going on with farm income. In part, not entirely, but in part because of what's going on with trade disputes with China.
Right.
The president's going to address this at 3:15 this afternoon. Bloomberg is reporting that, in fact, we're going to have $16 billion that are provided to the farmers. Is that going to take care of the problem?
No, it won't take care of the problem. I don't know a single farmer that wouldn't see that and say, sure, I'm happy to accept a helping hand because I'm really hurting right now. But what I think most farmers in Minnesota would say is that's a little Band-Aid for a big, ugly problem. Farm income in Minnesota is at its lowest over the last, lowest in 5 years. We know that farmers are keeping only 15 cents of every food dollar when a generation ago they were keeping 37 cents. They are really struggling, especially in dairy, but really across the board. And now in Minnesota, the weather, it will not stop raining. And so there's a real challenge getting crops in the ground. So the president's proposal, I haven't seen it yet, of course, but I look forward to reviewing it. But I really think that we ought to address the core challenges here.
There are a lot of core challenges to address. And yet yesterday, 24 hours ago, right now, we were seeing this extraordinary standoff between the president on one hand and Speaker Pelosi with Minority Leader Schumer on the other. And the president basically said, I'm not going to do business with Congress anymore, and we won't get things done like infrastructure, like drug price issues. This is part of what he had to say.
Drug prices are coming down. First time in 51 years because of my administration, but we can get them down way lower working with the Democrats. We can solve the problem on the border in 15 minutes if the Democrats would give us a few votes.
So, Senator, to those of us outside the Beltway, it sounds a little bit like the Hatfields and the McCoys. Everybody's blaming everybody else. In the meantime, things like you care about, such as clean energy, such as helping the farmers, such as drug prices, don't get addressed. Can we hope that anything gets done between now and the election in 2020?
Well, I hope so, because Minnesotans and Americans are going to be really fed up if we can't make some progress. You know, Minnesotans didn't send me here to scream and yell at people who don't agree with me. They sent me here to try to find common ground, and I think we all have to lean into that. But, you know, what the president did yesterday, I mean, first of all, I think it was kind of premeditated. He had placards on his podium before he went in there and blew up the meeting. And that isn't what we need. We need conversation, and especially on infrastructure. You know, we need investments in roads and bridges and transit. We need investment in rural broadband in Minnesota. We need big thinking about what we build to make this country, put it back on the competitive cutting edge. So I think it was a big mistake of him to just walk out of the meeting before it had even started.
From your assessment, what's going on up at Capitol Hill right now, is there any one of those issues you've mentioned, because there are several there, infrastructure and drug prices and farmers, clean energy, is there any one of those issues that you have hope that really you could get enough bipartisan support, at least to get the bill to the president's desk?
Well, I'll tell you what, I serve on the Health and Education, Labor and Pensions Committee, where our committee has a tradition of working bipartisanly. And right now, I think later today, we're going to be releasing a discussion brief on a series of policy proposals that could get signed into law because they have bipartisan support, including a proposal that I've been working on with Pat Roberts from Kansas, a Republican, to stop this process of the big drug companies extending their patents, their monopoly power, by making minimal changes to the formulation of a drug so that they can keep their monopoly for another 5 years. It's really ridiculous. So that's an example of something where there is bipartisan support, and maybe we can get it done this year.